Beautiful Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to Ethico University. Well, you guys are going to have a PhD today, so round of applause for you all. We have kind of dedicated our lives to helping ethics and compliance professionals drive more impact in their organization. And we spend a lot of time on Thursdays talking about concepts, talking about sometimes it can get a little bit academic. We always want to bring this stuff down to earth and talk about how we can bring some of these principles that we're talking about into practice. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Your LinkedIn, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. And we're going to get started today. We're going to be talking about the 10 commandments of E&C risk assessments. One of my favorite movies of all time is History of the World. And remember when Moses comes down and he says, I have the 15, and he drops one and breaks it and says, I mean the 10 commandments. There ain't 15, there's only 10 today. So we're going to be diving in. Let's get a massive round of applause for Teresa Russman. She is our solution engineer, and we're going to be walking through how do we go from theory to practice, right sizing risk assessments for ethics and compliance. Here are the 10 risk assessment commandments, the 10 commandments of risk assessment. We're going to be talking about thou shalt segment thy audience. Thou shalt make it relevant. Thou shalt weight what matters most. Thou shalt assess continuously, not just annually. Thou shalt ask about behaviors, not just knowledge. Thou shalt assess the environment, not just the individual. Thou shalt make it safe to tell the truth. Thou shalt connect the dots across domains. Thou shalt meet stakeholders where they are at. And thou shalt drill down to find the truth behind the numbers. We have taken a lot of input from people on the front lines, from clients, from advisors on how we can make tools that really help you do your job in a better way. So we're going to be walking through these commandments. We're going to be talking about some real tactical applications, and whether you're using the Ethico solution or you have your own solution, or whether you're still in spreadsheets, everything we're going to be talking about today, you'll be able to grab some of this and really start putting it into your program. So we want this to be value add. As always, drop any questions in the chat and we will get moving. Teresa is going to be sharing her screen as I walk through these different concepts. So the first one here is thou shalt segment thy audience. The principle, well, the challenge is that generic risk assessments really yield shallow data and survey fatigue. So the principle that is underlying this commandment, oh, by the way, if any of these are blurry, some folks have mentioned that some of these are blurry. If they're blurry, we're going to drop a link to the presentation itself in the chat so you can follow along at home. If they're not blurry, then you don't have to click the link, okay? All right, so the current challenge is that generic risk assessments, like I said, give us shallow results that sometimes give us false positives or false negatives. And a one-size risk assessment misses critical risks. So what we want to do when we're designing our risk assessments is design role-specific assessment pathways and tailor the questions and the level of complexity to the audience that you're speaking to. This one-size-fits-all problem is something that a lot of risk assessments sort of fall victim to. A board member is going to have very different risk ownership than somebody on the front lines. Front lines employees are going to have, operational risk, and these are fundamentally different exposures. So we want our risk relevance to be encapsulated in our risk assessment, and we want to vary those things by roles. And you know what? Survey fatigue is real. If we're sending around tons of surveys, there's probably other surveys coming from other departments in the organization. If 60% of the questions don't apply to the person, to that respondent, our completion rates are going to drop, and many times the responses we get are of lower quality. So throughout this presentation, we're going to be talking about how we might apply this for a use case that I think is extremely valuable, which is an AI risk assessment. We'll talk about this in a coming, commandment, but we want to be able to get pulse checks from the organization as new risks emerge. 3 years ago, nobody was talking about AI risks to the extent they are now. People were not using AI in all corners of the organization like they are now. So if we were going to apply this principle to an AI risk assessment, we might ask a frontline employee something like, do you use AI tools in your daily work? Have you entered confidential information into ChatGPT? Whereas you might ask a manager something like, when your team requests AI tools, what's the approval process? Or do you have the resources to conduct proper vendor reviews? All vendors are using AI to some degree. So when you apply this commandment, it's going to lead to better data quality, higher completion rates. 15 to 20 targeted questions are going to beat 80 generic ones that are just going out once a year, and it's going to give you better actionable insights. So Teresa, I want you to share how we might apply this in whatever tool or whatever set of spreadsheets, or some people are using forms, Google Forms or Teams Forms or whatever. How might somebody start to apply this and how they segment their audience?
So a great way to start with this is to create more targeted contact lists. And so as you can see, I've started a few here. I have one for all of the staff, one for just frontline employees, and one for executives. But your tool ideally should support this. I'll go ahead and pull or create a new list just for managers if we wanted to do a targeted assessment just for our managerial staff. You should be able to easily segment your employees here and create a targeted list of just employees or just managers in this case, and create a targeted list, and that way you can send them an assessment that's highly relevant for them with targeted, tailored questions. And so this is how you would go about doing that in our tool. But make sure you're using a tool that allows you to have those more tailored contact lists.
And if you don't have a tool, just start thinking about how you can send a segmented assessment out to these different constituent groups within your organization. All right, let's jump to commandment 2. Thou shalt make it relevant. Okay, so what we hear from employees is like, why am I answering 20 questions about something I don't do? The answer is we're wasting their time with bad survey design. When ethics and compliance has the opportunity to fix the branding problem that many of us are suffering from, or many of us are trying to change, making our questions relevant can do a lot to push that ball forward. This frustration factor is real. So the current challenge is these long, irrelevant assessments lead to abandonment, poor quality responses where somebody is just clicking buttons to get through it. Should only see questions relevant to their role. When somebody looks at a form that's 100 questions, 200 questions long, that psychological barrier can start to rise. When we can build in some branching logic into the assessment, it can do a lot to make it easier for somebody to get through it and only face them or only present questions to them that are going to be relevant based on their previous responses. So applying this branching logic and routing respondents to department specific questions or routing them to follow-up questions across this entire presentation is that the more work we can pull forward, the more thoughtful or intentional we can be on the front end, the better results we get on the back end, the more points of leverage we can create, the more effective our risk assessment can be. What's the point of a risk assessment? The point of a risk assessment is to...
Sorry, Nick, we lost you there for a sec.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's my my new computer. Hello. Okay. So what I want to talk about how this might apply in real time in the context of this example we're going to be using throughout the presentation with a nimble AI risk assessment. So if the first question is, does your role involve selecting or procuring AI tools? If they say yes, then maybe that's going to branch to a detailed vendor due diligence question. If it's no, then that might skip to the next question, such as, have you used generative AI like ChatGPT in your work? If yes, then you can ask them a question about data handling or confidentiality or IP protection. If not, boom, you're going to skip ahead. This does a lot to respect the time of the respondents, and it's going to give us, again, better data quality. Garbage of ethics and compliance, particularly in risk assessments. Giving that respondent respect really also helps kind of build some credibility for us as an ethics and compliance department that's trying to show up as a business person first, that's connecting to the objectives of the organization. So Teresa, let's walk through how like an application of this branching logic might look or might work, and kind of get a glimpse of how this risk owner experience might be influenced by it.
Absolutely. So I have an example assessment pulled up here. The respondent would simply walk through and select yes or no to these questions. And as you can see, based on that response, if it's a no, they're going to simply move on. If it's a yes, the form's going to open up and expand and ask those targeted follow-up questions. And so like Nick was touching on, this is going to prevent the respondent from getting overwhelmed by a ton of questions that maybe aren't applicable or aren't relevant to them. But if they do apply, we want to know that, and we want to have the functionality in place to have the form be able to expand and capture that additional detail.
So people are going to stay engaged when the questions feel relevant, and you learn depth where it matters and you skip breadth where it doesn't. For the next principle here, we want to talk about thou shalt weight what matters most. Okay. So the challenge is when we treat all findings equally, it dilutes our focus on the material risks. I'm a big materiality guy, and it's not just because I'm a CPA, it might be, but not all risks are created equal. And when your assessment scoring doesn't account for these different risk weights, and it doesn't, and they're not influenced by the actual risk priorities of the organization, we can end up kind of chasing our tail. So here's a pop quiz. Drop your answer in the chat for 1,000 points. Which is the bigger risk? Somebody using AI to draft an internal memo or someone using AI to make hiring decisions? Round of applause, 1,000 points. I think you got it right. If your assessment scores those things the same, you could be flying blind or, again, chasing your tail. So not all assessment questions are created equal, and many traditional surveys treat all risks the same. So we want to assign higher weights to the questions that involve higher stake decisions, and we want to implement impact-based scoring. This aligns our scoring with the organizational priorities and helps us configure the weightings. So here's how again, back to our AI nimble risk assessment. I'm going to walk through a couple of different types of AI use cases and how we might apply a different weighting schema across these different things. So if an AI system is used to make decisions like hiring or it's processing sensitive information, confidential data, that's going to get obviously something that's a much higher weight than a medium weight that might be applied to AI or vendor managed AI systems or data analytics involving personal information. We then would apply a low weight to things like productivity tools, content generation, general awareness questions. So if an AI or if an employee uses AI to draft emails, that's a low activity. If they use AI to screen job candidates, that's a high activity. So again, our job is to control and make bets with the resources that we have and spend our compliance budget where those material risks exist. When it comes time to board reporting or regulatory defensibility, when we can show that we've put that intentionality into our risk assessment and we at least put some thought into how we're weighting these different areas, it gives us a lot more defensibility, like I said, and gives us a lot more prioritization clarity. When 50 issues emerge from our risk assessment, how do you know which handful you're going to focus on? My favorite principle, the Pareto principle, is the 80-20 rule. That 20% is really going to move the needle. That's where our efforts need to be placed first. So when we can put those right weights in place, it's going to help us with that prioritization. Teresa, show us how we might start to think about weighting different questions or weighting different impact areas or rating different impact across questions within our tool or a tool that somebody else might be using.
Absolutely. So I have our tool pulled up here as an example. Kind of on the back end, as you're setting up your assessment, you have the ability here to add some weights to these values, to these responses. So, if a certain response is viewed as riskier, we want to give that a higher weight. And you can see down here an impact score as well. You have the ability to actually weight the impact of the question itself that you're asking. And so these are kind of multiplied together. Just to kind of give that full picture of the riskiness of whatever you're trying to assess. And so, it's really important you're using a tool that allows you to add this dimensionality to the risks you're trying to assess. When you're using kind of your standard Google form, a SurveyMonkey, something like that, it's not going to really capture this depth of the various risk landscape that's in front of you. And so you want to be sure you're using something that's going to allow you to assign these weights, again, to those various responses and assign an impact score for the question itself.
And I just want to, I'm going to keep kind of underscoring this throughout this presentation. Even if you're using a spreadsheet, you just want to apply this kind of thinking and put some weights and some impact scores in there and start to diagnose or start to calculate a different weighting across these different questions to, again, stack the deck in your favor and create the circumstances for your own success. Whether good or bad, ethics and compliance is not paint by numbers. It's up to us to apply our creativity and kind of, bring together our knowledge and, the circumstances that our organization is encountering. Okay, let's talk about commandment number 4, thou shalt assess continuously, not annually. I think this is one of the biggest ones. This is one of my favorite commandments. We all have our favorite of the 10 commandments. This is maybe mine. So emerging risks like AI, I was talking about this on an Ethicsverse episode recently, but emerging risks like AI are evolving way faster than these annual cycles. If our risk assessment process is really just, a once a year type of a cadence, there is the opportunity for these new risks to emerge that we might not catch again or assess again until that later until that sort of subsequent, annual process. So when the risk landscape is changing quickly, sometimes the annual assessments leave us blind spots for the rest of the year. So we want to and frankly, using a continuous risk assessment kind of mentality allows us to move this from like an annual thing to something that is part of how our organization thinks and operates. So deploying these micro assessments throughout the year, I think, is a major hack, can do a lot to, again, give us that information and on a second sort of layer of communicate to the organization how important risk management is. And doing these layered pulse checks can, again, give us better information when there are triggered events going on. So here's an example of how you might start to think about or build a risk assessment cadence that extends beyond that annual. So you might do your annual in Q4, kind of planning for next year, getting your priorities dialed in for the coming year, and then you may do another one, something like 6 to 8 weeks before budget prioritization or before budget finalization, to kind of identify resource needs, and then fill in the gaps there with a quarterly pulse check that's really either tied to emerging risks or tied to the 3 to 5 biggest risk areas for the segmented audience. I think the icing on top, or the cherry on top of the sundae, is building in the capability to do event-triggered assessments. So maybe you're doing M&A, maybe you've acquired a new company, maybe a new leader has come in, maybe there's been a change of the guard or a reorg within your organizations, or a data breach. Being able to follow up one of those events with a bite-sized, micro, nimble risk assessment can, again, let you pick your head up from your desk and reassess if the plans that you have for the coming months are the right plans. You can always make a different bet with your time. One of the beautiful things about life is you can do whatever you want. When we can get better information, and we can get a more constant drip of information from the stakeholders that we're meant to support, we can make a lot better bets with our time. Okay, Teresa, why don't you show us how we could start to organize that in our tool, or how we can start to think about building a framework of assessments that can go out at different times to different segmented groups.
Absolutely. So here I have some campaigns set up. You can see here at the bottom, here's our annual sort of more comprehensive risk assessment here. This is kind of that buckshot approach of, we're going to cover a lot of topics. We're going to send this to everybody and do that kind of annual pulse check. Up here, you can see we have some campaigns set up for each quarter. And so this is going to be that approach here Nick's talking about, where we're assessing continuously. We're doing regular pulse checks throughout the year because a lot can change in a year. And so we want to make sure, you're getting a full picture of your risks as they start to emerge.
So back to our AI risk assessment example. Let's say in Q1, you do a comprehensive annual risk assessment. In Q2, you do an AI or a nimble AI assessment after your AI strategy or your AI policy has been released. Following that up with a nimble assessment on third-party risks in Q3, and then a follow-up in Q4 on the Q2 AI findings. Did our remediation work? Throughout the year, these 5 to 10 question pulse checks can do a lot to kind of give you an early warning system, to stay relevant, to stay in front of folks. Again, so much of our job is influencing behavior. We have to say things 7 times, 7 ways. Let's keep in mind that the regulatory expectation around continuous monitoring of all kinds of risk is increasingly becoming the standard. So we have to solve for whether, everybody has a limited budget, everybody wants to have more people on their team, everybody wants more access. We're all faced with this, with a different sort of bouquet of constraints. It's your job to pick that lock in the situation that you're in. And again, stack the deck in your favor. Let's jump to risk assessment commandment number 5. Thou shalt ask about behaviors, not knowledge. This is maybe my second favorite one, okay? It's easy, the challenge is these knowledge-based questions can create this false sense of security. Behavior indicates real risk, not just knowledge. If we have 70% of people know about if 70% of people know about our AI policy, that's great, but are they following it? You won't know unless you ask. So We want to ask about actual behaviors, not just awareness, so that we can avoid that false security blanket. We want to include questions about organizational pressure. This is a great one. And we want to focus on recent specific actions in the last 6 months, in the last 2 weeks, in the last quarter, rather than general awareness. Tying it down to a time period is going to give you a better sense of where those risks might lie. So let's walk through a couple of examples of different question types, and these are going to be ranked from like least useful to most useful. So on the lowest tier, this is the base level. These are knowledge-based questions, again, in the context of how we might implement this principle for an AI risk assessment. So are you aware of the AI usage policy? Can you identify conflicts of interest? These stink. These are not the best kind. These are not the kind of questions that are really going to give you the right information. The next layer up are behavioral questions. These are much more useful. So in the past 6 months, have you used AI tools that have not been approved by IT? Have you reported concerns through official channels, or have you found workarounds? Have you made decisions where you've had a potential conflict of interest? This is going to reveal what's actually happening within your organization. The next layer up, these are even better. These are the observational questions. And I think what makes these questions good is that it removes the respondent from being the subject. They're not answering about themselves. They're answering about things that they've seen, and people are usually more truthful about that, right? So questions like, have you observed colleagues entering confidential information into AI tools? Have you witnessed managers discouraging AI or discouraging employees from raising concerns? Have you seen others bypass approval processes due to pressures from management or due to pressures to hit quarterly goals? The top of the mountain, okay, the top of the pyramid is when we can combine the pressure and environment questions. This is going to give us root causes. It's going to help us identify root causes, and we can see, like, is this a willful violation or is it a systemic problem? So questions like, have you felt pressure to use unauthorized AI tools to meet those performance targets? Is there adequate time to properly vet AI tools before deployment? What happens when someone raises concerns about AI risk? We know that in most cases, a violation is due to a bad system, not bad intentions, and combining these pressure and environment type questions can give us much better hints. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. More intentionality on the front end is going to give us much better results. How might we apply this in real time, Teresa? What are some use cases for this? My second favorite commandment.
So, I think you definitely want to make sure you're including those behavioral type questions. I have some examples here on the screen. I think it may still be beneficial to ask those sort of, more basic questions. Are you aware of this policy? Just to make sure that your messaging is landing as you're communicating these things to your workforce. But here you can see an example of how those more behavioral focused questions might appear on a risk assessment.
All right, my third favorite, just kidding. Thou shalt assess the environment, not just the individuals. So bad apples exist, of course, but most compliance violations or most compliance failures aren't due to bad apples. They're good apples in toxic barrels. So our job is not to assess the apples. We want to also look at the barrel itself. So focusing on these individual compliance misses end up missing the root causes. So measuring management support, assessing resource adequacy, identifying retaliation or negative consequences. 50% of people experience some kind of retaliation in their organization, perceived, whether it's real or not. They perceive that retaliation happening inside their organization, and that discourages other people from speaking up and sharing that risk intelligence. If we can apply this back to that first commandment, tailoring our environmental questions by level, we can get much better insights. So, this is commandment number 6. 6 and 5 are highly related. And again, more intentionality about the quality of the questions and what we're trying to get from those questions can do a lot to give us better results and better information that we can make better bets with our time on. So these bad outcomes don't stem from bad individuals. They usually stem from bad systems. It's not about bad intentions. It's about a bad environment, and those environments can be changed. Those systems can be fixed. So here are some great questions that assess the environment. We're going to talk about a couple for managers. We're going to talk about some for resources and some for psychological safety. So does your manager encourage raising concerns even if it slows down work? Have you seen leadership acknowledge and address issues raised by other employees? How about resources? Do you have adequate time to properly evaluate AI tools before you use them? Are Are approved AI alternatives available to meet your business needs? For psychological safety, do you feel comfortable raising concerns about AI risk? Again, I'm trying to tie this down to something that's extremely actionable. An AI risk assessment is something that I think everybody should be doing. Everybody is working on their AI policy right now, their AI governance framework. Following that up with a risk assessment that's super dialed into it not only reinforces the importance of that policy that you've spent so much time thinking about and researching, it's also going to give you some hints on where those gaps might be, where additional training or additional resources might need to be pushed forward. So there's a pattern recognition that we're going to start to see when we incorporate Commandment 5 and Commandment 6. We're going to see some high-risk patterns and some healthy patterns. So a high-risk pattern is going to be, high pressure, low manager support, and inadequate resources. That's going to lead to predictable violations. Our job is to help our organization see around the curve. And when we can get our finger on the pulse and we can get good responses that are in line with, high intentionality, thoughtful type questions, we're going to be able to recognize these patterns. Healthy patterns are going to be reasonable timeliness, coupled with manager modeling and available resources. When we can get clustering of these healthy patterns, we can feel better that the guardrails that we're putting in place, the guidance that we're pushing out to the stakeholders in the organization are doing what they're supposed to do. Teresa, show us a couple examples of these kinds of questions and how they might look, in a risk assessment on the back end.
Absolutely. So here are a few examples on how you can incorporate these types of questions and assessing the environment into your risk assessment. So we have one here. Does your manager encourage you to raise concerns about AI tool risks? Is there adequate time or are there adequate resources to conduct proper AI due diligence? Have you ever witnessed retaliation or negative consequences for questioning AI implementation, et cetera? And so these are really getting to the heart of what the environment, what the landscape looks like as your employees and your workforce use AI tools. So it's important to incorporate these types of questions as well. This may be the only opportunity these folks really take to share these insights. And so it's important we're capturing this kind of information with questions focused on the environment.
Listen, we all have web forums. We all have hotlines where people are pushing risk intelligence in the organization. We can multiply our impact when we're also pulling risk intelligence in through disclosures, through risk assessments like this. And when we can be thoughtful about the questions that go into it, we're going to get much better results and much more, Will hates this word, much more robust risk intelligence, okay? So I just want to underscore and notice, I want you guys to notice how our risk assessment that Teresa just showed included both individual behavior questions and environmental questions. This dual lens is going to help us reveal whether we have compliance problems or likely violations coming down the road. Okay, let's jump to our next one. This is thou shalt make it safe to tell the truth. Okay, this is an underlying principle. This should be in everything. We know that retaliation is a big issue across our organizations. It continues by generation to generation. It continues to be among the biggest reasons preventing people, these human sensors in the organization, the stakeholders who we're serving, it prevents them from sharing that risk intelligence. So anonymous or confidential assessments are going to yield better, honest data, especially about risky behaviors. And this fear of retaliation is a massive blocker for the types of risk intelligence that we need to do our job. At the end of the day, ethics and compliance is a human business. It's a human department. We can't do our job without the participation of the human beings in our organization who we're serving. So recognize that this impediment is out there and try to see around the curve and again stack the deck in your favor by handling that objection, that latent objection or that subconscious objection that people are going to have, fear of getting in trouble, in your messaging. So clearly communicating the confidentiality protections, clearly communicating about the concerns that people may have, clearly communicating about how this information is used, not to skewer somebody based on their response, but rather to de-risk the organization and make it easier for people to do their job. Is going to do a lot to get better participation and more authentic participation. We don't want people just clicking through no risk, no risk, no risk. That is of no value for us. Everybody's walking around with a 3-pound nuclear reactor between their ears. And when they are engaged and they are activated to be these human sensors in the organization, and there's clear pathways, whether it's through the hotline or whether it's through our risk assessment or any of the other, pathways that we've created in the risk management apparatus that we're managing, when those are cleared out, the level of risk intelligence we can get is so much deeper and has so much more dimensionality. So Teresa, how would you incorporate this one, commandment number 7?
So I think it's really important that you are intentional with your messaging when you're doing an initiative like a risk assessment. You want to kind of layer in some different stops along the way where you're reinforcing this messaging of anti-retaliation. Responses are confidential. So you can see I have a invitation email pulled up here as you're kind of kicking off your campaign. It's a good idea to include some messaging around this in your email. And so that just gives folks some confidence that they can speak up and share their thoughts and their feelings in a way that's going to help them feel protected. Also, you can kind of, real quick, you can also kind of reinforce this again on your risk assessment itself. And so, as you can see, I've included some verbiage here, just with some guidance around what this assessment's all about. We want all reports treated confidentially and without fear of retaliation. And so, I think when you can add these various layers, it's just going to help that messaging resonate with your audience.
So putting some messaging around clear communication, such as this is confidential, results are going to be reported in aggregate, no individual follow-up. Building those in your templates kind of to build some trust on the front end can do a lot to move the needle. Like saying something like, this is not a performance review or an investigation tool. This is for us to, improve the business or, mitigate risks that are latent within the organization. Putting some of those non-retaliation guarantees in that messaging. Again, put yourself in the shoes of the respondent. What might they be concerned about? Everybody has the same kind of self-preservation based concerns. When we can pull those forward, it gives us a lot more credibility and drives the participation, up to a much higher degree. If you report witnessing something that we must investigate, remember that everything will stay confidential. Reinforce this message, reinforce this commitment you have to the stakeholders in the organization who you're serving. And that can do a lot to advance your program forward and show that you're not a bumper sticker on the car. You are something that's really animating the organization. Okay, let's jump to my next one. Thou shalt connect the dots across risk domains. Many times our assessments are very siloed and we miss connected risks. So we all know that modern risks intersect. We all have felt the effect of siloing within our organization where we're beating our head against the silo wall and there's all that waste, there's all that dead weight loss in the organization, and there's all that frustration. AI, for example, is going to touch data privacy. It's going to touch cybersecurity. Could potentially, depending on how it's used, discrimination, vendor management, IP protection. So we want to keep in mind the interconnected and integrated nature of risk as a concept as we're building our risk assessments and as we're kind of pushing it out through the organization. So when we can separate assessments to span multiple risk, separate assessments should span multiple risk domains rather than just focusing myopically on a single risk. And we want to try to surface cross-domain patterns to identify some of these systemic control weaknesses. Remember, we have these obligations, we put controls in place, and there's always some of that residual risk. Well, how big is that residual risk? To what extent are our controls mitigating that risk to an acceptable level? We need to be able to see, pierce the veil and see through what's really going on and avoid falling victim to this siloed thinking that ends up kind of really compromising our efficacy. So when we also want to be able to drill down from aggregate views into specific risk domains in specific risk scenarios across departments or across levels within the organization. So when we have 7 different teams conducting 12 different risk assessments and nobody's comparing notes, we are going to really fall flat. Meanwhile, AI is touching all of these different things. So AI is really a great example of this cross-departmental, cross-domain kind of infiltration of a risk that we can end up misassessing or misdiagnosing if we're not thoughtful about it. So Teresa, how would we kind of think about building some analytical power and incorporating this commandment into our risk assessment, approach?
So, I have an example here pulled up. This is a sexual harassment and discrimination risk assessment, kind of more targeted on those topics. But here you'll see all of the results from the assessment. All of the responses are aggregated here in this dashboard. We have a heat map here. If you don't have a software tool, this is something you could manually kind of put together in Excel using conditional formatting, of course, with some manual work, some manual lift. But here, this is kind of aggregating all of your risks in one spot. And so it allows you to clearly see see what are your most certain severe risks. It also has your risks laid out here by risk areas. And so here we can kind of see and identify any hotspots as we compare these things side by side. Also, when you interact with this heat map and these tables here, you'll see that the data table below kind of dynamically updates and changes to reflect those risks, those most critical risks, right? Because I clicked on that cell. And so it's important you're able to kind of slice and dice your data, drill down on what's most important, what's most critical, so that you can properly prioritize your efforts and your resources accordingly.
So let's pull this down back into our AI risk assessment, example to really kind of make this very tactical and practical. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how AI is the perfect example of a technology that intersects with so many different risk areas in the organization. It creates cybersecurity risk. It can create privacy risk, DE&I or HR risks. If there's bias built in the hiring process, it can create third-party risks, depending on how our third-party vendors who are part of our value creation, network are leveraging AI. It can create IP risk, especially if company information is put into unapproved tools that are not sort of closed off, and it can create regulatory risks depending on the regime your organization is operating in. So we have to, again, try to create circumstances where we can increase the likelihood of cogent pattern recognition and give ourselves that cross-domain visibility. So I want to walk through some cross-domain questions in the context of this AI risk assessment example that we've been using throughout this presentation to kind of illustrate this. So here are some cybersecurity intersection type questions. Are the AI tools you use properly secured with access controls? Or have you received training on secure AI tool configuration? Or who has admin access to AI systems? The intersection with privacy, and again, we want to try to on the back end as we're building this out, we need to kind of zoom out and think about where are these intersections happening. Privacy intersection type questions. And again, you don't have to use all of these. We're just trying to illustrate this commandment in practice. What types of personal data are processed through AI tools? If there's the answer is none, obviously that should be deprioritized. If it is a lot, if it's patient information or whatever, that's something that you might want to have some branching logic to follow up on, or some branching questions to follow up on to, again, better diagnose the impact potential of those responses. Do you know if your AI tools comply with GDPR, for example? The proliferation of AI tools in the organization is way higher. I mean, again, think back to 3 years ago, 2 years ago, when these LLMs were first coming out, and fast forward to now, there's probably dozens of AI tools, AI use cases throughout your organization. It's our job to be that bird's eye view of the risk landscape that our business is traversing across, and we have to start to think about how these risks intersect with these different risk areas. For HR and DEI, even if you're using Indeed, there's some AI in that screening process now. So we need to have some kind of a, whether it's for regulatory defensibility or it's just so we can all sleep at night ourselves, we want to have some understanding on how this risk in particular integrates with or intersects with HR. So our AI tools used in hiring practices, for performance reviews or for promotion decisions, have these been tested for bias? Who's responsible for monitoring AI fairness? Some of these questions might not be relevant if you're in a relatively smaller organization. If you're in a much larger organization where it's hard to find the neck to choke, or hard to find who is responsible, this is going to give you some better hints on who you might need to follow up with, or what changes you might need to make to your AI policy in this example to curtail these risks and really mitigate it. So we need to kind of, again, we want to stack the deck in our favor and create the circumstances for us to recognize those patterns. So here is one example. Let's say we have weak AI governance, weak third-party risk management, and weak cybersecurity practices. This pattern might indicate that the department lacks overall risk maturity, and it might not just be an AI-specific problem. Again, risk is this amorphous thing. It kind of infiltrates through everything, and it's really hard to quantify. So we need to create, again, circumstances to get better data and get us a better view of what the, dimensions are, or what the shape of risk is for our organization. Let's say, here's another example. This is like an example of what the responses might be from this, nimble AI risk assessment that we're rolling out maybe on a quarterly basis or something like that. Maybe there's high AI adoption, low privacy awareness, and it's in a customer-facing role. This might be an urgent privacy incident waiting to happen. So that should direct our efforts and say, oh my gosh, look at this kind of a pattern that's coming from this division based on their AI use. Because I mean, even in our organization, which has under 150 people, the AI use cases are all over the place. People are using it in so many different ways. Marketing is using it for a different way, then salespeople are using it, then ops folks are using it, and so forth. And so we have this unique opportunity to be that circulatory system of the organization, to touch these different departments and really get some feedback when we can be thoughtful, when we can segment appropriately, when we can build those questions in a smart way to get a better look at really the dimension of risk in the company. Okay, let's jump to number 9 here. Number 9, thou shalt meet your stakeholders where they are or where they are at. So low completion rates, especially among senior executives, can be very detrimental to the results and the data that we're able to get out of our risk assessment. Less tech-savvy populations can often leave critical blind spots in our assessments. We can only respond to what we know. I mean, picture a ethics and compliance organization that's only getting risk intelligence through their hotline. Well, there's probably 50 reports in their organization. If they're crushing it, maybe they're getting 4 reports per 100 when, there's an order of magnitude more risk intelligence in their organization. When we can multiply our impact and multiply the opportunities we have by getting more risk intelligence, like I said, pulling some of that risk intelligence in, as opposed to just kind of sitting there waiting for people to push that into our system, we can do our job a lot better. We can have much higher confidence in the bets we're making, because we're all implicitly making bets with our time. We're making bets with our team's time with respect to the priorities we have. We're making bets with our own time on which emails we're responding to or where we're directing our efforts. We want to have better data, and we want to have more robust data. Sorry, Will. We want to have more robust data that can give us higher expected value. That's really what all of this is about. We're never going to mitigate all the risk in the organization. We're never going to eliminate all the risk in the organization. We want to show up as business people that are connecting to the objectives of the organization, and we want to tolerate, or we want to calibrate our application of risk mitigation to the risk tolerance of the organization. It's really hard to do that when we're looking through a pinhole. We need to be able to see our world in 3 or 4 dimensions. So not all stakeholders are going to complete digital risk assessments independently. High value risk conversations happen in person, and some populations need a little bit of help and need a little bit of prodding. So I love this feature. I love this functionality. And again, you don't need to use our tool to do this. But having the ability, or making as part of your process, enabling proxy assessments can do a lot to get you better results. Maybe there's an executive who's never responding to your emails. Maybe they're never clicking into it to fill out that form. A proxy risk assessment is where you reach out to that person, or you schedule a 15-minute meeting with them and you fill that form out for them, or you do that risk assessment in real time to get the information you need. Again, you have to solve for outcome. You have to put the ball in the net. So you have to create the circumstances for success for yourself, and you got to get creative on how we're interacting with the stakeholder groups. Building relationships through direct engagement is critical. This is going to give you some clues on what the realities are. If you're in a manufacturing organization and the manager or the director of operations for a particular facility is always on the shop room floor and is not in front of their computer all the time, that person has a lot of risk intelligence that you might need to get the results of, and you might need those responses. Building those relationships and understanding what the realities are of that person's situation can help you get better responses in faster time. And try to capture that nuanced context through conversations that the written responses might miss. I think it's a best practice at particular levels, whether it's manager or executive, to follow back up with those folks based on their responses and get some more of that nuance. A risk assessment doesn't just create qualitative data or just quantitative data. It also can create qualitative data. And that qualitative data is many times more valuable than the trending data, again, depending on your sample size, that can give you a better, more confidence in the bets you're making with your time. So you build these, brilliant assessments, but completion rates are only 34%. It might be because you're asking, somebody who's near retirement to spend 45 minutes on a desktop, and they have a hard time responding to text. They have a hard time using their phone. So when we can have a better understanding of the population, and we can have more inroads or easier inroads to kind of drop those barriers that are preventing people from giving you the risk intelligence that's in their brain, the information you need to do your job, you can really move the needle. So I want you to think about how communication preferences differ. I want you to think about how timing differs. We want more intelligence faster. That's always what we're trying to solve for. So let's walk through a couple of different stakeholder groups and what some of those challenges might be for folks. So let's say we have frontline hourly workers with limited computer access. How might we attack that? Well, we can have a mobilized assessment. Again, if you're sending around an email, or you're sending around a Teams form, or you're using one of the Ethico forms, those should all be mobilized, or those should be mobile optimized, right? We want to have shorter assessments for those kinds of folks because they're not going to sit there for an hour. QR codes posted on emails or on posters to increase those response rates. That's a best practice for this type of a population, and allow for completion to occur in multiple sessions. Now let's talk about a different group. Let's talk about knowledge workers. They might have survey fatigue. They might have busy calendars. In this hybrid work environment, everything's a freaking meeting now, right? So everyone's calendar is full. Everybody is very busy. And so we want to have both mobile and desktop flexibility. We want to allow for or use as a best practice, maybe in our template that we're sending around, to say, hey, block out 15 minutes. This won't take that long. Manage those expectations so that when they add it to their to-do list, it's not this, this black hole of time for them. And email reminders with one-click access can do a lot to increase those completion rates. And remember, ethics and compliance is a game of continuous improvement. So maybe you're at a 30% completion rate for your risk assessments. Maybe the responses you're getting are very half-baked. Well, use that as a baseline and start to try to figure out how you can just do some little improvement. Push that 30% to 40%. Try to do a word count on responses for people at different levels, and start to see how we might be able to move that needle forward. Integrating with different tools, integrating with your compliance newsletter if you're sending something like that around. And again, trying to make it easy. Put yourself in the shoes of the people, the respondents, the stakeholders that you're serving, and I guarantee you there's going to be some light bulbs that turn on how you can get better risk intelligence from them. Managers, who's a manager? Raise your hand if you're a manager. Okay, hopefully a bunch of people are raising their hand in their office. They're overloaded. They are protective of their team's time. They have results that they're responsible for generating, and they need to see value. So framing out to them, again, this is all about meeting people where they're at and anticipating the objections, pulling these objections, or these, doing what's called an accusation audit, pulling these things forward and anticipating those and handling those on the front end can do a lot to drive that completion. Framing out for a manager why this matters for their team, giving them access to a dashboard that shows them what those completion rates are. Even better if you can integrate this into their annual performance, or leverage some of the natural competitiveness across managers within a division or managers across different divisions for these kinds of completion rates can do a lot to, again, hack the behaviors of these folks whose endorsement you need to get your completion levels to the level that you want. And finally, for executives have limited time. They need strategic framing, and they often have this board level perspective. So again, dialing that into those critical questions, those 15 questions, versus maybe you're doing 10 or 15 questions for executives, depending on what they're over, versus maybe 35 for managers. Governance level questions are going to be better from an executive. Again, back to that first one, we want to segment our audience. We want to be thoughtful about the risk assessments that we're sending out. And then linking these to strategic priorities does a lot to not only reinforce your brand, but to get that reinforcement from the very powerful tone at the top that can do a lot to unlock some of this risk intelligence. So Teresa, how would you apply some of these things for this number 9 here that, how would we put this into practice?
So I really love this commandment. This is probably my favorite one. As a
we all got a favorite.
as a solutions engineer, this is something I have to remind myself of, is that, everybody has a different level of technical prowess, technical know-how, right? And so I really love this use case of, you have somebody maybe in manufacturing, somebody on the manufacturing floor who's not at their desk all the time. Well, I'm going to just show you how we support this functionality in our tool. But basically, by clicking on somebody's name, I can pull up, their assessment and kind of fill it out on their behalf as a proxy submission. And so whether this is over the phone or they're sitting across from my desk, I could kind of fill this out on their behalf and, just kind of go through and answer the questions kind of in an interview style format. That way I'm still capturing that critical risk intelligence. This isn't sort of falling through the cracks. And so not only are we capturing it, but now it's also compiled within the context of the rest of the assessment that we've conducted. So I'm not having to kind of patch together different risk scores from different places. It's all going to still be compiled in one place. So I would just kind of, in that interview format, walk through, ask verbally these questions to the respondent and fill it out on their behalf. And all of those changes would be tracked here in the audit history, which is kind of a helpful feature as well. So that's how it works in our tool. But yeah, I love this commandment. Really important to meet people where they're at, so you're not missing any of that critical risk intelligence.
Yeah, don't let the technology tail or the tech limitation tail wag the risk assessment dog. It's your job to get the risk intelligence you need to inform your priorities, to inform those bets that you're making with your time. So whether you have a solution like this or you're, using spreadsheets, it's easy to pick up the phone. It's easy to form a Teams meeting, record that meeting and just interview that person and drop that transcript appropriately to answer those questions. But don't let low completion rates define your risk assessment process, because that can feel very deflating. All right, we made it to number 10. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for Teresa. Teresa is a freaking genius. Love you, Teresa. All right. Thou shalt drill down to find the truth behind the numbers. I love the idea of cascading analysis. I love the idea of overcoming this current challenge where we have low completion rates from senior executives or field personnel, and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about how we can filter those kind of results and how we can drill down. Perhaps as we go through, we see some of these questions in certain sections that really are more important, and we want to get kind of a sliced picture of the responses to really kind of boil everything down. When we're talking about when we're talking about our risk assessments, let's say we have like a really high completion rate, but does that include our sales team who's using unapproved AI information? We want to be able to filter that to find that out. Oh, it's only 40% in that group. Now we know where the fire is. Now we know which managers we might need to follow up with, or where we need to put some more controls or some more kind of training in place. So averages many times can hide these outliers. And so if we're just taking whatever is served up from our spreadsheet or whatever is served up without kind of putting that critical eye or that analytical eye across those questions, we can sometimes lead ourselves to some conclusions that are maybe not as accurate or not as clear as we would like them to be. So high risk minorities are masked in low risk majorities. Okay, so if 90% completion rate looks great, back to my example about the sales team, that might look great when in actuality we have low completion rates in a high risk minority group within the organization, the sales team, the support team, whatever. So let's talk a little bit about the power of response filtering. So we can look in an aggregate view, or we can filter by AI users. We can filter by daily AI users. We could filter again by customer-facing daily AI users. Those might all give us different completion rates or different views of the aggregate responses that is showing in our heat map or in our risk scoring. So this is not, ethics and compliance is not for dummies. Okay, there's no idiots in this game. It takes some detective work, and we have to be smart about how we might slice and dice our information to deduce investigatively where those risks might be. Have you, if somebody is saying, have you observed potential ethical violations? If 18% or 20% or something say yes, now let's only do a fast filter on those who have actually observed those. Did you report it? Okay, only 35% reported. Okay, this might inform us that we need to do a campaign on speaking up more, or an educational campaign on all the options that we've created for people to speak up and share more of that risk intelligence. We can do a second filter and say, okay, of those people who saw it but didn't report it, we can drill into why did you not? Well, maybe some of them would say, I didn't think anything would be done about it. Maybe another portion are scared of retaliation. Great. That's great risk intelligence for us to attack that risk that exists in the organization, that latent risk that is kind of floating out there, preventing that flow of risk intelligence for us. And we can do a campaign, or we can do a series of educational videos or shorts or posters that really address, we really care about, doing something about the risk intelligence we hear. And we have tremendous commitment to trying to stamp out retaliation in our organization. How about this? How about we filter in a little bit more on only those who feared retaliation? Maybe some of those we could cross-reference with managers' support. Maybe they rated their managers poorly. Okay, those are managers that might need to be ejected from the organization, or those are managers that we might need to keep a closer eye on, or we need to go to their managers and say, hey, there's an issue here with retaliation and maybe some toxic management that's contributing to lower productivity, higher employee turnover, lower employee engagement, any of those kinds of things. Again, when we can see the breadth of risk in our organization and we can slice that data, it's going to lead us to different conclusions, different hypotheses that we can try to falsify. Okay, let's talk about some risk flag filtering. Actually, Teresa, why don't you show us this in practice, because we're getting close to the end here, and I want to make sure that we have some time for questions and share what our next session is about.
Absolutely. So here I have our HIPAA risk assessment pulled up just to show you a different example. But what I really want to highlight is, being able to filter and, again, drill down on those responses and really find the truth here behind the numbers. So we have this filtering functionality here. I can deselect these questions. Maybe I want to just drill down on a specific question. I can select that. And then you'll see also we have these filter options here on the column headers. And so this allows me to, just select a specific response and apply that filter. Well, now I can isolate that these two folks don't know we have a written HIPAA policy and that I need to address that. And so this is a pretty small sample size, but you can imagine if you have a large organization, how important the ability to filter this information becomes. So it's important that you have a tool that will support being able to do that at scale. But yeah, just helps you kind of get your eyes on the information that you need so you can take the next steps and actually apply or jump into action based on this information.
So again, the more information we have, the better we can take action on that information. And anybody who's done a risk assessment, very rarely is there a silver bullet application. Okay, great. Now I just have to do this one thing. It's a bunch of trade-offs, and that's what our life is. Our life is a bunch of different bets that we're making with our time, a bunch of different trade-offs. And so we need to bring this kind of knowledge and this kind of a framework or perspective to our risk assessments to really multiply out our impact in the organization. Don't let your risk assessment process turn into compliance theater. I love that term and I hate it at the same time, right? There's so much compliance theater. There's so many two-dimensional programs out there where it's just a bunch of words on the page. It's just a bunch of policies that sit on the shelf. When ethics and compliance is having the biggest impact, it's really animated. It's really humanized, and it's really connected to the realities of the organization. You have the opportunity to show up as a business person. You have an opportunity to make better bets with your time and really drive that impact forward. We're standing at the precipice of a brand new chapter of ethics and compliance where the next 10 years can look significantly different, not just for your career, but for our broader our broader community. It can look way different than the last 10 years, but it's going to take us showing up in a different way. And it's hard to show up in a different way when we just have all the same old approaches. What got us here, as my friend Deb Sabatini says, what got us here is not going to get us there. We have to be open to new ideas, and we have to be applying we have to be remixing these approaches and stacking the deck in our favor. We want to be surgical with our remediation. We don't want blanket approaches. We want to maximize our ROI. Everybody has a limited budget. Who doesn't want double the budget? Who doesn't want double the resources? Who doesn't want double the time? Like, we all want these things. So when we can create circumstances to have evidence-based prioritization, and we can overlay a risk-based approach to the bets that we're making with our time, we can do a lot to move the needle. So we really hope that you enjoyed this session. We want to help push our profession forward. There's so much opportunity for us to get more traction and integrate deeper into our organizations, and we want to be a part of that. So we're always open for new feedback about different topics to cover, different things to dive deeper on. I hope you enjoyed this Ethico University. Tell all of your friends that you got a PhD today. Each week we're going to be doing PhDs, okay? Anytime we do Ethico University, you can start stacking those PhDs up. Here's a little glimpse of our ecosystem of solutions. These are all kind of connected that allow you to pick and choose what you want that might move the needle most for you. In line with Ethico University, we're promoting our risk intelligence solution. This is really an outcome more than it is a packaging. So there might be some things on here that you're like, oh, I already have that. I don't need that. But you're going to get 25% off if you want to book a demo this quarter. And just see what's out there. Again, it's incumbent on you to make sure you know what is out there and you are giving your team and giving yourself these circumstances for success. This Thursday, we got a killer session for you on our normal Ethicsverse. So hope to see you at the coolest place to be every Thursday, and see you in a couple days. Bye-bye.